Book The New Map, Chapter 24, The Test of Prudence. The South China Sea may be about oil and natural gas and flows of trade. Yet, as the International Institute for Strategic Studies puts it, maritime disputes in the South China Sea are at their heart about power politics. From a strategic point of view, it is one of the most contentious issues between China and the United States. Chinese spokesmen frequently describe America as seeking to contain and encircle a rising China. For the United States, it is about freedom of seas and relations with the countries of Southeast Asia. Since World War II, the United States has been the guarantor of an open sea lanes that underpin global stability and the 90 trillion world economy. And it is on those open sea lanes that China has flourished. The relationship of the G2 between the rising power and the dominant power has become more complex as the balance shifts between the two countries, China and USA, and as the economies of the rest of Asia becomes increasingly integrated with China's. As one of Singaporean diplomats put it, China will loom larger and larger in all of our economic lives. China is creating new realities, building up a web of economic interests, trade, investment, infrastructure, extending out from Southwest Asia to Southeast Asia, binding it into one economic sphere. Xi Jinping is of a new generation, the first Chinese leader born after World War II. His father, a veteran of the revolution, had risen to the vice premier before being purged and imprisoned. In the words of a book prepared by China's foreign language press, after Xi's father was wronged and disgraced, Xi experienced tough times. During the Cultural Revolution, he suffered public humiliation and hunger, experienced homelessness, and was even held in custody on one occasion. He was then sent off as an educated youth to the countryside, where he labored for 7 years. For a time he lived in a cave and slept on earth beds, and then in a work camp. Life was very hard, he has said. It also hardened him. After the Cultural Revolution, he went to university and then rose up through government and party positions, becoming a member of the Politburo in 2007 and emerging as the future leader. For Xi, the Communist Party is paramount and central. Just a moment. The principle for China's rise and its discipline and control are essential. In November 2012, several days becoming party leader, Xi led the new Politburo on a very short field trip just across Tiananmen Square to the National Museum of China. Passing by the myriad treasures of China's 5,000-year history, he halted at an exhibit called The Road of Rejuvenation, which depicted the suffering and humiliation that China had suffered at the hands of the imperialists, and its path to revival under the Communist Party. Now everyone is discussing the China dream. He said in front of the exhibit, "I believe that realizing the great revival of the Chinese people is the greatest dream of the Chinese nation in modern times." In 2013, Xi also became president. In the year since, he has launched what has been called China's Third Revolution, following on those of Mao and Deng. This aims at a new era of modernization that would lift the economy up the value chain, chain and create a moderately well-off society. He has reasserted the primacy of the Communist Party and the state's dominating role in the economy, initiated a massive anti-corruption campaign, promoted a more assertive great power role for China on the world stage, elevated the Navy and the Air Force, and reigned in the Internet. In 2018, the National People's Congress made him president for life, breaking with the post-Deng tradition of term limits for presidents. The Congress also elevated Xi Jinping fought to the level of Mao Zedong fought, and then Xiaoping fought. In turn, she declared that China now stood tall and firm. He evoked a mighty east wind, and that would carry China forward. And with a message that he said was aimed at those who are accustomed of threatening others, and clearly referring to the South China Sea, he declared, "It is absolutely impossible to separate a single inch of territory of our great country. That determination would be backed up," he said, "by a continued military build-up aimed at a world-class armed forces, and what he called a modern combat system with distinctive Chinese characteristics." Incidents and near collisions continue in the South China Sea between Chinese ships and American Navy vessels, making freedom of navigation patrols, including in October 2019, when a Chinese destroyer came within 45 yards on an American destroyer, forcing it to jam on the brakes. Other nations, Japan, Australia, and Europeans, are conducting similar patrols through those waters. The dangerous game of maps also occurs in an airspace above the South China Sea. In one instance, 2 Chinese jets came within 50 feet of an American aircraft. In another, the radio cracked on the U.S. surveillance plane flying over the Spratly Island, which the Chinese call the Nansha Island, with 6 different warnings. U.S. military aircraft and the Chinese military. China has sovereignty over the Nansha Island and adjacent waters. Leave immediately and keep off to avoiding any misunderstanding. This is a sovereign, immune United States naval aircraft conducting lawful military activities beyond the national airspace of any coastal state, replied an American airman, reading from a carefully worded card. In exercising the rights guaranteed by international law, I am operating with due regard for the rights of any duties of all states. Shortly after, the Chinese news outlet Global Times issued a thumbs up to Chinese airmen for defending Chinese territory. In response to the growing competition, the United States introduced its own new map for the entire region, what Secretary of State Mike Pompeo calls the map of the Indo-Pacific, which firmly places India in the region as a major counterbalance to China. Make no mistake, said Pompeo, the Indo-Pacific, which stretches from the United States west coast to the west coast of India, is a region of great importance to American foreign policy and a big part of America's international economic future. The United States, he added, will oppose any country that seeks domination into the Indo-Pacific Sea. Backing this up, to the 2019 U.S. defense budget identified what is called China's military and coercive activities in the South China Sea as one of the Pentagon's top priorities and reasons for increased military spending. The contest over the South China Sea and the U.S.-China rivalry create dilemmas for the countries that comprise the Association of Southeast Asian Nations, ASEAN, It was founded in 1974 as the Vietnam War was coming to an end. It was a very dark time, remembered Singaporean Ambassador Tommy Cole, which the United States about to withdraw from Vietnam, fear what would spread that the entire region would fall to communist revolution. But events did not work out that way at all, and today communist Vietnam is integrating into the global market economy. Unlike the European Union, the 10 countries that comprise ASEAN have widely different political systems, but they are becoming an increasingly connected economic community of 600 million people. The countries face continued challenges in balancing and then rebalancing. Southeast Asia is integrated in security terms with the United States, but in economic terms with China, said Chen Han-chi, former Singaporean ambassador to the United States. Moreover, the Chinese message, repeated many times over to the other countries with coastlines along the South China Sea, is to say, we are geographical reality. The US alliance is a geopolitical concept. The ASEAN countries are increasingly integrated with China in terms of trade. In 2005, US trade with ASEAN was 50% higher than was China's. Today, it is reversed. ASEAN's trade with China is 50% higher than with the United States. Yet, at the same time, the Asian countries are also seeking to bolster security relations with the United States as the only realistic counterweight in order to assure their own independence of actions in the region. China's arms build-up has led other countries in the region, ASEAN, as well as Japan and Australia, to spend increasing sums of money on weapons. As former Australian Prime Minister Kevin Rudd once observed, it's a plain at daylight that there is a significant military and naval build-up across the Asia-Pacific region. That's a reality. Some of the Asian countries have a different worry about, as a Singaporean strategist put it, a US that is distracted with an inability to focus on geostrategic issues. There is another kind of risk. As one observer asked, are the nations of Southeast Asia and China and the United States to be hosted to the risk of aggressive behavior by individual commanders that spread out the control and that could have dire consequences? China has been a great beneficiary of the open world economy and the free flow of commerce on the world's oceans that the United States has championed. And its growth objectives are far more likely to be achieved in a stable, peaceful world than in one driven by confrontation and disrupted by conflict. Some measures could reduce the risks in the South China Sea. The ASEAN countries and China are negotiating a code of conduct to reduce tension in the region. But one of the sticking points in the Chinese proposal that would give it a veto over other countries conducting military exercises with the United States. A much stronger military-to-military dialogue and greater transparency about programs could help to mitigate the growing strategic mistrust and the uncertainty about the critical but often murky question of intentions. A step was taken in that direction with two confidence-building measures in 2014. The United States and China agreed to alert each other to major military exercises in the region and adopted rules of behavior for managing naval and air force encounters. Tempering the passion of populist nationalism in the countries bordering the sea would give governments more flexibility to resolve differences. Clarification of the treatment of land features and their rights in the adjacent waters of these features would be important. Another issue, one of the most vexing, like to bother or worry someone, is understanding of the legal status of the exclusive economic zones, the EEZ, or perhaps the best that can be hoped for as a play-on-demand, mutually assured destruction of the US-Soviet nuclear standoff in the Cold War years, maybe MAA, mutually assured ambiguity, but seeking to address issues in the multilateral framework with a critical role for ASEAN would help modulate the conviction that the South China Sea is fundamentally a standoff between China and the United States. In terms of energy, the clash of nations can be eased with the recognition that the offshore waters of the South China Sea are unlikely to be another Persian Gulf in the terms of supply, and that the most important contribution to energy security is to secure passage of tankers through its waters. For Japan and South Korea, which also depend mightily of the South China Sea as the highway for much of their exports and imports, its control by China would be regarded as a potentially major threat. As former Japanese Foreign Minister Yoriko Kawaguchi put it with great simplicity, sea lanes are important to Japan. Thus, two nations would become increasingly alarmed, in the words of a retired Japanese admirer, by China's unilateral ambition to monopolize the whole South China Sea and achieve control of most of the sea lanes of communications and the lifetimes of Japan and Korea. Yet, both Japan and South Korea are increasingly interconnected with China. Japan's exports to China are about the same as those to the United States, about 20% in each case of total exports. Korea is more dependent. 27% of its exports go to China, as opposed to 12% to the United States. Between the G2, the interdependence is extensive. General Motors sells more cars in China than in the United States. Before the Trump's trade war, up to 60% of the US soybean exports went to China, and Apple sold 40 billion a year of iPhones. China was also expected to become the biggest market for US LNG. Yet, there is no shortage of sharp and divisive economic issues between the two countries. Intellectual property rights and theft. The requirements that US firms had to be joint ventures in China, hidden subsidies, cyber intrusion, and yet trade wars. When Donald Trump became president, he changed He changed the setting on the table. No longer, in the view of his administration, is China an economic partner, albeit a challenging one. Now it is an economic adversary as well as a strategic rival. The WTO consensus is out of the window. Trump denounced the 2001 WTO agreement as the greatest job theft in history. Once in the White House, he declared, trade wars are good and easy to win, although not indicating which ones he had in mind. Those of the 1930s had proven neither good nor easy to win, and ended badly for all concerned. The trade war is part of the striking shift in the overall approach of the United States. The Trump administration's national security strategy represented a sharp break from the position of 5 previous presidents. Thus presidents and their administrations had not hesitated to criticize China over a range of major issues. But they all sought to emphasize engagement and the positive potential. Cooperative relationship, Reagan. Working together to contribute to regional stability and global balance, George W. Bush. Broader engagement, Clinton. Constructive relationship with a changing China and responsible stakeholder, George W. Bush, the son. Deepen our cooperation, Obama. Trump's national security strategy throws engagement and the WTO consensus out of the window. It casts China as a deeply menacing geopolitical rival and at the top among America's adversaries. It is a revisionist power along with Russia that is seeking to shape the world antithetical to our interests and values. The Department of Defense followed up with its National Defense Strategy, which declared that China is a strategic competitor using predatory economics to intimidate its neighbors while militarizing features in the South China Sea. The language highlights a fundamental shift away from 2 decades of a war on terror to a new strategic era, rivalry with Russia and much more so with China. As Secretary of Defense Mark Esper put it, China number 1, Russia number 2. For China was now seen as seeking to displace the United States from its global position and developing the capabilities to do so. For 2 decades, in this view, the United States had been both oblivious and distracted and lulled into denial by China's entry into the World Trade Organization in 2001, the WTO. If it was a Chinese strategist, said a senior Pentagon official, the only thing I would regret is that I did not keep the United States asleep for longer. In an October 2018 speech, Vice President Mike Pence elaborated on a new perspective. China, he said, has masterminded the wholesale theft of American technology and has built an unparalleled surveillance state and an Orwellian system. It is seeking to erode America's military advantages and push the United States of America from the Western Pacific. But Pence added, we will not be intimated. It was in what is otherwise a deeply divided as partisan Washington. Pence's remarks reflect what has become a broad consensus across party lines, as would become evident in the 2020 presidential campaign. China responded with its own white paper, China's National Defense in the New Era. While more moderate in some parts, it talked about areas of cooperation between China and the United States, including their respective militaries. It too defined the new era. As one of the great power strategic competition in the Chinese version, the fault lays with America's growing hegemonism, power politics, unilateralism. The United States, is said, is pursuing absolute military superiority and has undermined global strategic security. The Asia-Pacific, it said, has become a focus of major country competition because countries from outside the region, that is the United States, illegally enter China's territorial waters and the waters and airspace near China's islands and reefs, undermining China's national security. China's declared would resist all threats to its position. The white paper went on to blame external forces against the United States for fueling the Taiwanese independence movement. Just to be clear about what was already abundantly clear, Senior Colonel Wu Qian is presenting the white paper in Beijing, said that in the event of a move toward Taiwanese independence, the People's Liberation Army was ready to go to war. Together, the Chinese white paper and two U.S. papers, one analyst soberly observed, provide a clear warning of growing strategic rivalry between an existing and emerging superpower. A rivalry that will shape the future of both China and the U.S. for decades to come. In the national security establishment of both nations, each side is focusing on the other as the future enemy. The continuing rancor over the coronavirus and its origin in Wuhan made relations even worse. And then, in May 2020, after months of demonstrations in Hong Kong, some violent Beijing imposed security laws and security systems on the semi-autonomous Hong Kong. China was abrogating the concept of one country, two systems, which had been the governing principle since the British handover of Hong Kong to China in 1997. Beijing asserted that this was a purely internal matter. The international reaction was strong. By confidence, at almost exactly the same time, the White House issued a new strategy on China. Beijing, it said, was seeking to transform the international order to align with the Communist Party's interests and ideology. In response, the administration has adopted a competitive approach, which includes a tolerance of greater bilateral friction. The friction would continue to increase. Underlying the trade war is a deeper concern over future technologies. A high-tech algorithmic arms race is already underway, led by competition for preeminence in artificial intelligence. Beijing's Made in China 2025 strategy, enunciated in 2017, aims for make China a leader in the 10 high-tech industries. The Chinese point out that their per capita income is only about 1/6 of the United States and that it needs to move up the value chain to avoid the stagnation of the middle income trap. The goal is also to catch up with the United States. In his speech, Pence responded that the Communist Party of China could end up controlling 90% of the world's most advanced industries, which would enable it to win the commanding heights of the 21st century economy. The battle over technology has already been joined over 5G connectivity and specifically the Chinese company Huawei, the largest telecommunications company in the world and at the forefront of 5G, fifth-generation cellular networking technology. Huawei has become one of China's great national champions, a symbol of its technological and commercial powers. Washington argues that Huawei's technology provides a backdoor for Chinese government surveillance and possible manipulation, and that the company is covertly connected to the government and the Communist Party. It banned Huawei from the US telecommunications networks and is trying to persuade other countries to do the same. Indeed, in a manner reminiscent of the British and German battleships before World War I, fifth-generation cellular 5G, along with Huawei, has become in this era the embodiment of the new rivalry. Amid the rising tensions, a warning about the dangers of mutual animosity and zero-sum calculations came from Robert Zoellick, who is in 2005, as Deputy Secretary of State, had originally outlined the concept of China as a responsible stakeholder. A decade and a half later, Zoellick pointed out that the word stakeholder in this title of the speech had been followed by a question mark. Nothing was for sure, but, said Zoellick, Even with all the evident tensions, China had, in fact, engaged in multiple ways within the international system that the United States, Western Europe, and Japan had originally created. But now, he added, the United States was pushing China into championing its own parallel, separate system with very different rules, and that could be very costly both economically and politically. Economic interdependence has been the ballast to the military and strategic rivalry, but the ballast appeared to be a risk of being dumped overboard into the South China Sea, along with the more competitive attitude that went with it. This new instability in the economic relationship adds to the risk that accident, confrontation, or clash will not be managed and contained. The obvious fact is that neither the United States nor China is going away. While tensions are rising, the G2 are reached together on the same planet, although there is a little possibility of grand bargain, the application of practical solutions combined with prudence can help mitigate the risks better than it would seem than to have to borrow from mariners' maps and apply the legend's dangerous ground to the new geopolitical maps of the 21st century. That was all on chapter 24. The next talks about the Belt and Road building. Bye bye. See you next video.